Hey, class of 2020, this is David Rau. I'm a financial professional at HGK Financial. Today we're going to be talking about the basics of savings, investing, and debt management. I actually graduated from LSU with a degree in chemical engineering in 2017, decided that I needed to come back for 2 more years and see if we could cheer on the Tigers to a national championship. So I got my MBA in 2019. Unfortunately, I did not get the national championship while I was here, but we got it the year after, so I'm still okay. And my mom is actually a financial planner, and that is what inspired me to sort of be on the track that I'm on today. So I've been doing this for a couple years now and been exposed to it my whole life. So it's been a fun ride. But we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as I can. I tried to put as much information as I could in here just to give you some fundamentals and foundation for you to sort of build your own plan around. So for starters, the first thing that's super important for you to do whenever you get your first job or whatever it is, or maybe it's your third or fourth, but now you're entering the real world and you need to figure out a budget. So there's only a few different places where your money goes. The first one is unfortunately taxes, and that one's decided for you. So, maybe you're in the 20% tax bracket, or maybe it's 30%, just depends on your income. That's going to come right out of your paycheck and you'll never see it. So you don't have to really worry about budgeting for it. Then next would be you have, your basic needs, and then you have discretionary expenses, and the last one is savings. And so just to talk about how we sort of ration these out. Well, taxes is taken care of for us, and savings, I would say usually 10% is kind of the minimum that we're shooting for if you're planning on saving for retirement. 15% would be a good amount, and 20% would be that sort of like above and beyond, and make sure you're being really careful to save enough for retirement. So whether it's that 20 to 30% for taxes and then 20% for savings, well, that leaves half of your income to be used for needs and discretionary expenses. And usually we see about 30 to 35% for needs and maybe, 15 to 20% for discretionary expenses. That's totally up to you and how you want to structure your life. If you got really low expenses like for housing and insurance and all of your other things, and you don't have a lot of debt payments to make, then you can spend more money on discretionary expenses, assuming that you're saving enough. So, whether or not you want to spend your money on living in a really nice house, or maybe you spend a lot of money in Tigerland, it's up to you, and sort of find a balance that fits for your life. Okay. So the question that people a lot of times have is, how should I prioritize my spending? Where should I be putting my money? And these four things sort of fit into your needs and saving buckets. These encompass all of those things essentially. So we've got growth, debt, liquidity, and protection. And those are sort of the categories we can put our money in. So for growth, I'm just going to talk about the difference between a traditional and a Roth 401k and IRA. Basically, with a traditional account, you get to defer taxes today, so you manipulate your tax rate today, so you pay less taxes. But whenever you get to retirement time, whenever that is, and you want to take money out of that account, you will get taxed as standard ordinary income. With a Roth, it works exactly the opposite. So you pay your taxes today, and then you get to take it out tax-free later. Usually it's a good idea to have a little bit of both of these, and especially if you're in a low tax bracket, it wouldn't be bad to consider funding a Roth option right now. Second is debt. So, there's good and there's bad debt, and we're just going to define good debt as having a low interest rate and you have a long time to pay it back. And I'll get into why it's important to have a long time to pay it back in a few slides, but that's just our definition for now. Third is liquidity. So you need an emergency fund of some kind, just a place to go to store cash if you ever need it for anything that comes up. Typical guidance says between 3 to 12 months of expenses would be a good amount. I usually like 6 months, and we'll talk a little bit more about why I say that in a second. Protection, a lot of times I ask people, well, what's your biggest asset? And they tell me, oh, it's my car or it's my house. And they don't really think about, well, it's actually all of the future earnings that you will make from today until the day you retire. So that's a much bigger sum of money than just your car or your house. So I find a lot of people really neglect protecting themselves on their future earnings, and I think it's really important that everybody go talk to their employer and see if they have some sort of group long-term disability policy. It's super cheap, very, very affordable stuff. At least go talk to them about it. And if they don't offer it, there are other options available should you want to look into those. Now, I gave them to you in this order now, but really we didn't talk about why they're in this order or try and make sense of it. So I just want to go through them one by one and talk about them and see if we can come up with a funding priority basically and how we should fund these things and make sure that they're in place. So to start, we'll just go growth versus debt. So growth, super important. If we don't invest in growth assets, we will basically never probably have enough money to retire. We need that growth to help fund our retirement. But whenever you compare it to debt, if you were to say, let's say you have some bad debt, like some credit card debt or something like that, and you're paying 15 to 20%, well, if our growth asset hypothetically is only getting 8%, the debt is actually going to overwhelm the growth. So we really need to make sure that we have good debt before we start worrying about funding our growth objectives. So that kind of puts debt a little bit ahead of growth in the priority of how we need to create our plan, essentially. The third one, liquidity, we're going to compare that to growth and debt. So basically the questions are, well, okay, does funding your 401k give you any access to liquidity? The answer is no. You can't access that money until you're 59 and a half without paying a pretty severe penalty. Paying down debt is great, but does paying down debt early give you any liquidity? The answer is also no. So really the questions are, okay, so if I get in a car wreck and I have to pay my car deductible, is having money in a 401k going to help me? Is having no debt going to help me? The answer is no. Or, if it's a healthcare thing where you have to go to the hospital and pay your co-insurance and deductible for your healthcare costs. Your growth and debt pieces aren't going to help you pay those immediate needs. So the last question we want to ask ourselves is, okay, how do we fund our growth and our debt? Well, we typically use our income. And so what would happen if we, let's say, got laid off, especially in crazy times like this where that's happening a lot, and we didn't have work for a few months? Are we going to be able to keep funding our growth and our debt if we don't have somewhere else with a cash store to support us? And the answer is no. So that's why liquidity kind of edges out debt and growth a little bit in order of priority of funding, and make sure that we get that in place before we worry about, throwing tons of cash at our debt or trying to fund our 401k up to, 20%. So the last one is protection, and I talked about it in the liquidity portion. So basically the question is, all right, whenever we were talking about liquidity, we needed it to pay for our deductibles. But what if we didn't have car insurance, and what if we didn't have health insurance? Well, now instead of paying a few $1,000 deductible, well, we need a much bigger amount of cash on hand, because if we have a surgery performed on us, that's going to be anywhere between $20,000 to $40,000 potentially. Or if we get in a car wreck and we total our car, well, now we have to pay for a whole new car note on top of the one we may already have. So these things could be, pretty devastating financially. So it's really important that we have the proper protection in place before we move further down the line. And so the net effect is that this is sort of the opposite of what a lot of people, might think it is or have been led to believe or told. And it's not that, growth is the least important one. It really is probably the most important, but it's just not the most important in order of priority of funding. So that's just something to keep in mind when you're putting together your own plan. So a few things you need to do are coordinate your liquidity and protection. So basically, this I know you can't see it, but it says, can I afford to pay all of my deductibles? So, you've got your car insurance deductible, your health insurance deductible. You need to be able to make sure you have enough liquidity to pay for those. And so what if I had a car wreck that caused injuries? So you're paying both of them at the same time, and then you might be unable to work for a period of time. And so how does that, do you have enough cash on hand to afford that sort of scenario? And lastly, if you've done a really good job of building up your liquidity and you have a nice emergency fund, it might make sense to self-insure a little bit. And what I mean by that is raise your deductibles. So if your car insurance deductible is $500 and you have $20,000 in cash on hand, it kind of makes sense to go ahead and self-insure that last $1,500, depending on how much it saves you a month. So basically, you'll save money every month by raising your deductible. And if you're saving $100 a month by raising your car deductible from $500 to $2,000, well, basically in 15 months you're going to have broken even on doing that. So even if you did get in a wreck after the first 15 months, well, you didn't spend any extra money. So those are times that it makes sense to maybe lower your premiums and reduce the impact of insurance on your cash flow to help you plan out. So next we're going to go over student debt, and really this can apply to any type of debt, but I'm just focusing on student debt since y'all are students and some of you may have it. The question that I hear all the time is, should I refinance? And there's a few questions you got to ask back. Is your loan forgivable upon death? So if you have a government loan, a lot of times these are going to be forgivable if you die. So if you have a family, that can be important. The next would be, how much does it cost for you to refinance? There's typically upfront costs doing that sort of thing. Is it going to outweigh the good that you're seeing by refinancing? And the last one is, well, will the duration of the loan change? So why is that important? Well, if you had 15 years to pay off your loan initially, and then you refinance and now you only have 5 years to pay, what's going to end up happening is that because you had 15 years in the old loan, it only required a certain amount of money. But once you move it to 5 years, it might require almost 3 times as much money to pay off the loan. So do you have the cash flow available to do that? And is it in your best interest? So the second question that I hear all the time is, how much should I pay towards my loans, whatever they are, student loans or any kind of loan? Paying extra above and beyond what the required payment is will reduce the total amount of interest you pay. So you're paying down principal whenever you pay that extra amount. So that means you have to pay less interest over the long run. There are some negatives to doing this, though, such as the fact that you may be negatively affecting your cash flow and losing, some opportunity by doing that. So if you had another investment opportunity that would, potentially give you a higher rate of return than your loan, was that the best place for you to put that money? And that's just something to consider, not saying that it's always best to invest somewhere else, but it does typically work best to have a balance between, cutting down on your debt and saving money in other places. So especially if you don't have a big emergency fund, you don't really want to attack that debt because you have nothing to show for it, no liquidity to go along with it. Next, we're going to talk about growth, and basically just going to give you a few pointers here and a few tidbits. Nothing mind-blowing, but basically plan for the long road. Everybody says this, invest for the long run. As long as you never sell your assets, even if they do have a paper loss where they drop in value, as long as you have the same number of shares, you never accept a real loss. So at least to consider, in the past, it's never not come back. So we're hoping that it does again, even this time. Next would be, consider at least contributing up to the match for your 401k. It's essentially free money. It's hard to pass up on. Consider it an extra raise for your salary. Whatever percent they're going to match, it's just a raise for your salary, and it's going to really help you save for retirement. The last one is watch for fees for your investments. So, watch for upfront sales charges, commissions, whatever it is, and especially expense ratios, which a lot of people don't realize they're paying. So you could be paying anywhere from, 0.5% to 2% in expense ratios for some investments. It's just something to keep your eye out for. And the last one is the power of compounding. So just comparing two cases here. In one scenario, we're going to invest $10,000 a year for 30 years, and at an 8% growth rate, that gives us $1.1 million. In the second scenario, we're going to invest the exact same dollar amount, the same $300,000, but we're going to only do it over 15 years instead. And we're going to have half as much money because of that. So that's why people call it the eighth wonder of the world. It's about time in the market. You just want to be in there and let your money work for you, basically. And lastly, for maybe some of the engineers out there who don't like the idea of just picking a number as a percentage of your salary and starting to save it, you can figure out what your own retirement needs may be, or take a guess at them by using Excel. So some of you might, never want to do this, but some of you may. So I figured I'd throw it in here. So basically what you need to do first is figure out, okay, what does my income today mean in 30 years whenever I actually retire? So if you, in this example, so we're going to count on, use your own, whatever inflation rate makes sense to you. In this example, I'm using 2%. So 2% inflation for 30 years, and the present value is $50,000 of, let's say your current salary is $50,000. Well, $50,000 inflated at 2% for 30 years is actually $90,000. So that's how much income you would need to basically replace your current salary with the same spending power. Next, we need to figure out, okay, well, how much am I saving and what is that projected to grow to? So usually whenever we project what our balances are going to be in the future, we want to use a pretty conservative interest rate. So in this example, I'm using 6.5%. And that would be 6.5% net of fees. So that's still, a pretty decent rate of return, but conservative still. And we're going to say, okay, 6.5% growth for 30 years, and we're putting in $10,000 a year. That's going to grow to $863,000 by the time you get to retirement. Now, how much income can you draw from this $863,000? We use the safe withdrawal rate. That's sort of an industry standard, and this paper was done by Wade Pfau. He's the head retirement income researcher at the American College who does all of the sort of financial planning designations and stuff like that. He's got some really interesting papers out that talk about this exact problem and maybe some other ways that we can tackle it. So if you're interested in that, I'll give you my email at the end, and I can send over some cool articles on this stuff. But for now, we'll say it's 3 to 4% based on industry standards and based on past returns. So if we have $863,000 and we can take 4% out, well, that's going to give us $34,000 a year of retirement income. So, in this scenario, maybe you would want to consider saving more, or maybe you will factor in Social Security and say, okay, that's going to be pretty close to what I need. This is just a basic, quick way to create an estimate for yourself for what you might want. So that's all I've got. Congratulations, class of 2020. I know you guys are going to do great things. I know it's been crazy out here, not a great time to enter the job market, but hey, whatever happens, it'll be for the best, and I know you'll do great. So yeah, for me, maybe you'll want to follow my footsteps, go get that MBA. It's a pretty fun time and very useful for my future. So I'm glad I did that. Basically, yeah, good luck with everything. If you have any questions or, want to put together your own plan and want some guidance or whatever it is, feel free to email me, drau@hdk.com. I'd be happy to help and answer any of your questions. Y'all have a great day, and good luck in your endeavors becoming professionals out there in the real world. Bye-bye.